The first thing I noticed was the silence, not the quiet you get on open water, not the kind you learn to live with after 100 nights. Alone on a boat. This was different. This was the kind of silence that comes right after something stops. Like a held breath. Like the ocean itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. I want to tell you what happened out there, because 3 weeks later, I still can't explain it. And there's a boat registered 40 miles south of where I found mine that officially sank in 1987. My name is Ethan Marsh. I spent 6 years in the Navy working sonar before I came home and took a quieter job inspecting, mooring buoys and marker lights for the county. Mostly solo trips, mostly boring. I liked boring. Boring was what I needed after my wife passed. My boat is a 32-foot trawler called the Wandering Tide. White hull, faded blue stripe along the waterline. The kind of boat nobody looks twice at. In any harbor on this coast, I'd worked that stretch of coastline for almost 4 years by then. I knew which markers drifted a little in a hard current, which channels silted up faster than the charts admitted, which stretch of water the older fishermen still wouldn't cross at night without a reason. I used to think that last part was superstition, the kind that gets passed down at the docks over coffee, the kind you nod along to without really believing. I'd heard my share of it. Every harbor has somebody with a boating horror story they swear happened to their cousin, or their captain, or a boat 2 slips down that isn't there anymore. I never gave those stories much weight. I trusted instruments. I trusted training. 6 years of sonar work teaches you that the ocean doesn't lie. It just speaks in frequencies most people never learn to hear. That night I was 3 miles offshore, checking a channel marker that had gone dark on the automated report. Clear sky when I left the dock. Calm water. Warm enough that I hadn't bothered with a jacket, just a flannel over a t-shirt. Coffee going cold in the cup holder. The kind of night you'd take for granted. By the time I reached the marker, the fog had come in, not rolled in. Came in, like someone had poured it straight out of the sky, and it hadn't touched the water first. 1 minute I could see the lights of the marina behind me, small and orange and familiar. The next minute there was nothing behind me at all, and the temperature had dropped enough that I could see my own breath, which doesn't happen on that stretch of coast in that season, not ever. Not in the 4 years I'd worked it. If you've ever heard a real boating horror story, you know fog isn't the scary part. Fog is normal. What's not normal is when your instruments stop agreeing with each other. My GPS said I was 0.6 miles from the marker. My depth sounder said I was in water 400 feet deep, which would have put me miles further out than I'd traveled. My radio, which had been clear all night, started picking up something underneath the static. Not words. Not yet. Just a rhythm, like somebody tapping a hull. I remember laughing it off. Actually laughing alone in the fog, because that's what you do when your brain hasn't caught up to your instincts yet. I ran a hand along the console, checked the breaker panel, cycled the depth sounder off and back on the way you would with any piece of equipment that's misbehaving. It came back reading the exact same number. 400 feet, steady, unmoving, as if the number wasn't a malfunction at all, but a fact the instrument was simply reporting correctly. And I was the one who didn't understand where I actually was. If you're the kind of person who likes stories that sit with you a little longer than they should, this is a good time to hit subscribe, because Eerie Atmos X is where I put the ones I can't explain. And this is one of those. I cut the engine to idle and checked my chart plotter again. Still disagreeing with the depth sounder. Still disagreeing with what my eyes told me. Because through the fog, maybe 80 yards off my port side, I saw a light, not a channel marker, not a buoy, a running light, red, low on the water, the kind mounted on the port bow of a boat. I hailed on channel 16. No response. I hailed again. This time the static under the silence sharpened, just for a second, into something that sounded almost like my name. Marsh isn't a common name. I told myself it was the wind moving through the rigging, or my own brain doing what brains do at 2 a.m. in fog thick enough to eat sound. The light didn't move. I did. I brought the wandering tide in slow, engine barely above idle, running lights on, because whatever was out there, I wanted them to see me before I saw them. Standard procedure. The kind of thing 6 years of Navy training puts into your hands, even when your mind is somewhere else entirely. At 40 yards I could make out a shape. A hull. Old, low in the water, wood not fiberglass. The kind of boat you don't see anymore outside of maritime museums. At 20 yards, I could read the name on the bow. Chipped paint. Barely legible. Kestrel. I didn't know that name meant anything yet. That came later, back at the dock, when I couldn't sleep and pulled up the Coast Guard archive out of habit more than any real intention. The Kestrel, a 36-foot fishing trawler, reported missing with all 3 crew aboard in November of 1987, roughly 40 miles south of where I was standing when I typed it into the search bar. But that night, all I knew was that there was a boat in front of me with no lights on except one. No engine sound, no radio response, and no visible crew. I called out. My voice sounded wrong to me even as it left my mouth, too small for the amount of fog around. Nothing answered. For almost a full minute, nothing happened at all, and I remember that minute more clearly than almost anything else that night, because it was the closest thing to relief I got. My shoulders came down an inch. I told myself it was an abandoned hull, something that had slipped its moorings somewhere up the coast, drifted out on a bad current. Nothing more sinister than bad luck and neglect. I even reached for my radio to call it in to the Coast Guard as a hazard to navigation, the kind of report I'd filed a dozen times before for debris and derelict gear. That's when something moved. Not on the Kestrel. Behind me. On my own boat, I turned fast enough to bang my hip against the console, and there was nothing there. Just my own deck, my own gear, the cooler I'd forgotten to close properly rocking slightly with the swell. Rocking on water that, a second ago, had been glass calm. I want to be honest with you about something. Fear doesn't come all at once. It comes in stages, and I went through every one of them out there. First, it's your body. Your hands go cold before your mind even understands why. Then it's your breathing, shallow, like you're trying not to be heard by something that already knows exactly where you are. Then it's the thoughts, the ones you can't control, the ones that ask questions you don't want answered. Was that a shadow or was that a shape? Did that sound come from the water or did it come from inside the hull? I checked my depth sounder again. 400 feet. Still wrong. Still impossible for where my GPS insisted I was. The tapping on the radio static had gotten louder, close enough now that I could tell it wasn't random. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Over and over, patient, like someone testing whether I was listening. I know Morse code. 6 years in the Navy, you learn things you never expected to need again. 3 short taps isn't just 3 short taps. In Morse, 3 short is the letter S and 3 shorts. 3 longs, 3 shorts is the oldest distress signal there is. Someone or something was sending SOS through my own radio static, and the source wasn't the Kestrel sitting dead in the water in front of me. The signal was coming from directly beneath my hull. I don't know how long I stood there, deciding whether to look over the side. Longer than I'd like to admit. I remember gripping the rail hard enough that my knuckles went white before I'd even leaned forward, my body bracing for something my mind hadn't agreed to look at yet. When I finally did, the water under my own boat wasn't black the way it should have been at that depth. That far from shore, that late at night. It was lit, faint, greenish, like something below the surface was giving off its own light. And for just a moment, maybe 2 seconds, maybe less, I saw shapes moving in that glow. Not fish. Too large, too slow, too deliberate, moving in a pattern like they were circling something. Or someone. That's when the Kestrel's engine started. An engine that shouldn't exist anymore. On a boat that had been sitting dead and lightless 30 yards off my bow. Turned over and caught, and the sound of it wasn't right. It was underwater somehow, muffled, like I was hearing it through fathoms instead of open air. I made a decision in that moment that I still can't fully justify with logic, only with instinct, which is that I did not want to be the reason that boat had a witness. I threw the throttle forward. The wandering tide doesn't move fast. It's a working boat, built for stability, not speed. But in that moment, it felt like the engine understood something I didn't have time to explain, and we surged forward into fog, so thick I couldn't see my own bow rail. Behind me, the tapping stopped. The green light under the water stopped. But the engine sound, the Kestrel's engine sound, didn't stop. It followed. Not faster than me. Not slower. Exactly matched, like it was pacing me on purpose. Like whatever was driving it wanted me to know it could keep up without trying. I ran blind through that fog for what my GPS log later told me was 11 minutes. It felt like considerably longer. Every one of those minutes the sound stayed behind me, close enough to hear over my own engine, never closing the distance, never falling back. Somewhere in the middle of those 11 minutes, I made myself do something I'm not proud of, which was look down at my own chart plotter one more time, just to see if the numbers had changed, if there was any version of this that still made sense. What I saw instead was a second track appearing on the display, a faint secondary blip trailing exactly behind my own position, at exactly the distance the engine sound suggested, registering on a screen that had no radar input feeding it. No reason to be showing anything at all beyond my own vessel. I turned the plotter off. I didn't need it telling me things I already knew from the sound alone. At some point during those 11 minutes, my radio went completely silent. No static. No tapping. Nothing. In open water at night, true silence on Channel 16 is its own kind of wrong, because there's always something, weather chatter, another vessel, the hum of interference. This was a silence with weight to it, the kind you feel in your chest before your ears fully register it. Then, as suddenly as the fog had come in, it thinned, and I could see the lights of the harbor ahead of me, warm and yellow and completely, achingly ordinary. The engine sound behind me didn't follow me into clear water. It stopped exactly at the fog line, like there was a boundary it either couldn't or wouldn't cross. I didn't look back to confirm that. I want to be honest about that too. I kept my eyes forward until I was tied up at the dock, hands shaking too hard to manage the cleat hitch on the first 2 attempts. The harbor master found me sitting in my slip an hour later, engine off, lights on, staring at nothing. He asked if I was all right. I told him the fog had gotten thick out there. He said there hadn't been any fog reported that night. Not from any other vessel, not from the Coast Guard station, not from the buoy weather sensor a half mile from where I'd been anchored. I went home. I didn't sleep. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, I searched the name Kestrel and found the archive entry. The 1987 disappearance, the 3 names of the crew who were never recovered. The last known position, roughly matching the coordinates my own GPS had insisted I was nowhere near. I sat with that page open on my laptop for a long time, long enough for the sky outside my window to start turning gray, reading the same 3 names over and over until they stopped looking like words and just looked like shapes on a screen. The next morning, still running on no sleep and too much coffee, I did something I hadn't done in years, which was walk down to the far end of the docks where the old-timers keep their gear, the ones who fished that coast since before GPS existed, the ones who navigate half by instrument and half by memory. There's a man named Walt Deering who's kept a slip there longer than I've been alive, and if anyone on that waterfront would know something about a boat called the Kestrel, it would be him. I didn't plan to tell him everything. I only meant to ask a simple question, whether the name meant anything to him. I watched his face change before I'd even finished saying it. He didn't ask why I wanted to know. He just set down the net he'd been mending and told me to sit. Walt told me the Kestrel went down in a squall that nobody on shore ever logged, because by the time anyone realized she was overdue, the weather had already cleared and there was nothing left to report. 3 men aboard. No wreckage ever recovered, no bodies, nothing but a single life ring that washed up 2 weeks later, almost 60 miles from where she'd last radioed in, which put her drift pattern somewhere that made no sense against the currents. Anybody understood. He told me she'd been seen since. Not often, not by everyone, but every few years, somebody working that stretch alone at night comes back with a story that sounds a little too much like mine. Fog that isn't in any forecast, instruments disagreeing with themselves, a tapping on the radio that isn't quite static. He said the ones who talk about it usually stop going out alone after. He said the ones who don't talk about it are the ones he worries about more. I asked him, carefully, if he'd ever heard of anyone finding something afterward, something that didn't belong to them. He didn't answer that directly. He just looked at me for a long moment, the way you look at someone when you already know the answer and you're deciding whether telling them will help or make it worse. Then he said something I haven't been able to shake since. He said the Kestrel wasn't looking to take anybody. He said she was looking for somebody to finish carrying something her own crew never got the chance to bring home, and that whatever she left with you was never really the point. The point was whether you were the kind of person who'd notice it was there. I laughed it off in front of him the same way I'd laughed off the tapping on the radio, because that's easier than sitting with what he actually meant. But I left the docks that afternoon carrying something heavier than I'd walked in with. And it had nothing to do with the tool bag over my shoulder. I told myself I wasn't going back out to that stretch of water again that week. I lasted 4 days. On the 5th night, I had a legitimate reason. A second marker light out roughly a mile from where I'd seen the Kestrel, and I told myself that was all it was. A job routine, daylight hours if I could help it. I left the dock at 4 in the afternoon, plenty of light left, plenty of margin before dark. The tide was against me longer than the charts predicted, and by the time I reached the marker, the sun was already low enough to turn the water the color of rust. I fixed the light in under 10 minutes. I should have turned straight back. Instead, I found myself idling there, engine running, eyes on the horizon in the direction where the fog had come from that first night, telling myself I was just being thorough, just double-checking the area, when what I was actually doing was waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't take long. The temperature dropped first, the same way it had before, fast enough that I felt it on my arms before I consciously registered it. Then the light started to change, not fog exactly, more like the air itself thickening, the horizon losing its edges the way a photograph loses focus. I had maybe 90 seconds of clear thinking left before the world outside my boat turned the same flat. Direction was gray as before, and in that 90 seconds I made the choice to stay rather than run, because some part of me needed to know if what happened that first night had actually happened at all, or if I'd built an entire waking nightmare out of exhaustion and grief and a dead man's coincidence of a name. The radio found its static before I even reached for the dial. Under it, faint at first, then unmistakable, 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. This time I didn't hesitate before answering. I keyed the mic, and without fully deciding to, tapped back. 3 short. An answer to an SOS I had no way of confirming was even real. I found myself responding the only way that felt honest, which was to let whatever was listening know that somebody had heard it. The tapping stopped instantly. Not faded. Stopped the way a held breath stops when it's finally released. Then, from somewhere off my starboard side, closer than the Kestrel had been the first night, close enough that I felt the displacement of water against my own hull, before I saw anything at all. That same green light bloomed beneath the surface, and this time it didn't stay beneath the surface. It rose, slow, deliberate, until it broke the waterline maybe 15 feet from where I stood. And for one full second, the length of time it takes to inhale and hold it, I saw the shape of a hull beneath that glow. The same old wooden lines, the same low silhouette, rising just enough to show itself before sinking away again into water that went black the instant it disappeared. I didn't run that time. I want you to understand that, because I still don't fully understand it myself. I stood there, hands on the rail, and I said out loud, into fog that swallowed the sound almost before it left my mouth, that I heard them. That whatever they'd been trying to say for almost 40 years, somebody finally heard it. The fog lifted within the minute. Not slowly. All at once, the way a held breath finally lets go, and the ordinary orange lights of the harbor were sitting right where they'd always been, closer than I expected. Close enough that the entire encounter couldn't have lasted more than a few minutes by the clock, though it had felt like considerably longer standing inside it. I went back to see Walt the next day. I told him what happened, the tapping, the light, the answer I'd given without planning to. He didn't seem surprised. He told me that in all his years on that water, he'd never once heard of anybody answering back. He said most people just run, which he didn't blame them for, and that maybe that was the difference this time. He didn't finish the thought. I didn't ask him to. 2 days later, still telling myself I'd made peace with enough of it to move forward, I went back to that same buoy to finish an unrelated inspection I'd been putting off. Daylight this time. Flat, calm water, visibility for miles, 3 other boats within sight the whole trip out. I want you to understand that I did not go back out there because I was brave. I went back because the alternative was letting that stretch of water own something in me permanently, and I wasn't ready to give it the dot the marker light was fixed. The depth sounder read a clean, unremarkable 62 feet the entire way out and the entire way back. Nothing about the trip gave me any reason to believe anything unusual had happened 2 nights before, and for about 6 hours I actually let myself believe that. Here's the part I haven't told anyone until now, and it's the reason I still keep my running lights on even when the wandering tide is tied up safely at the dock overnight. That evening, doing a routine check on my own hull, the kind of maintenance you do without thinking, checking for barnacles, checking the prop, checking the anchor line, I found something coiled at the base of my anchor locker, tangled in the chain. A strip of old rope. Hemp, not synthetic. The kind of rope nobody's used on a working boat since sometime before I was born. I didn't put it there. I've never carried hemp rope on that boat in the 4 years I've owned her. I still have it. I don't know why I kept it instead of throwing it back into the water where it came from. Maybe because some part of me understood that whatever had been signaling that night wanted something to be found, and I was the only one who'd been close enough to find it. I go back out on the water most weeks. It's still my job, still the quiet I need. But every single time the fog starts coming in faster than the forecast said it would, I find myself checking channel 16 a little too closely, listening for a rhythm underneath the static that isn't quite random. I haven't heard it again. Not yet, but I also haven't stopped listening. Last week, for the first time since that night, I noticed the rope had moved. Not far, just from the drawer where I keep it to the counter beside it. And I live alone and nobody else has a key. And I have gone back and forth more times than I can count trying to convince myself I moved it, and simply don't remember doing it. I want that to be true. I'm not sure it is. If you made it this far, I want to know something honestly. If you'd seen that light through the fog that night, would you have hailed it the way I did? Or would you have turned your own boat around the second your instruments stopped making sense? Tell me in the comments, because I still don't know if what I did was brave or just the wrong kind of curious. And if you know somebody who's spent enough nights on open water to have their own story like this one, send this to them. Some stories only make sense to the people who've already felt that kind of silence for themselves. I keep that strip of hemp rope in a drawer in my cabin now, or at least I try to. Some nights when the boat rocks a little more than the water outside explains, I think about taking it out and dropping it back into the sea, giving it back to whatever the kestrel was still looking for. I haven't done it yet. I'm not sure I ever will.